Hello and welcome to another episode of The Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. Um, those of you that have listened for a while, you've got a pretty good grasp on what I typically will organize the conversations around. And oftentimes it does move into some way, shape, or form a conversation around the power of culture. And my guest today, Paula Caligiuri, I'm going to introduce her in just a moment here, but I just want to highlight something here. When we look at the nature of culture and how it actually impacts what we do in life, it's a fascinating deep dive into oftentimes for what many people consider a very murky pond. It's kind of like, where do I find my footing? Is there a bottom here someplace that I can stand on? There's some mystery around just what is culture. I mean, obviously, one way to think about it is it's the ways we've agreed to do what we do around here. That's kind of shows up as culture. It's a very colloquially and generalized definition of it, but it's far more than that. There's a lot to be said around the admonition that I believe it was Warren Bennis, and I'll be corrected on this if I'm wrong on it, but strategy, culture will lead strategy for lunch. And that's actually very true in my experience. And I've worked all over the world. And I've seen strategic plans and strategic initiatives just be cut by a million cuts by culture. And it dies on the vine. Best intended, but it didn't happen because there was a cultural implication that nobody paid attention to. And how leaders actually facilitate moving in those environments and actually facilitate working in those environments with their teams as well as with themselves is something that we're going to be looking at today. So, and it does have to do with how do we keep connected to the soul of the business, the soul of the business. And, I want to just welcome Paula. I'm going to just kind of read a couple of things here. I don't typically read something, but there's enough here that I want to pay attention to here. She works extensively with leading organizations and universities on the development of individuals' cultural agility. And that phrase, cultural agility, when I first came across it, and it wasn't through my introduction to Paula, I had come across the term cultural agility, and I went, whoa, that's an interesting way of positioning something. What does that actually mean? Well, we're going to find out because we've got the world's leading expert, I believe, here on cultural agility. She's co-authored or authored several award-winning articles and books, including Cultural Agility, Building a Pipeline of Successful Global Professionals, Build Your Cultural Agility, and Live, I like this one, Live for a Living. Live for a Living, which was co-authored by her co-founder of a company that she is, I believe, president of, Skillset. And we're going to be talking about that as well. So, Paula, without further ado, I want to just welcome you to the show.
Blaine, it's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, I'm going to just jump into the deep end of this murky water here. Cultural agility. Can you provide a 5-cent definition so that we can begin to work with it?
Absolutely. So it's an individual's ability to comfortably and effectively work in different contexts, work in different cultures, work in different countries, and work with people who are demographically different. So people from different cultures. So it's working in difference.
Working in difference. Yeah. Not indifferent.
Not indifferent, but in
situations here. Yeah. So, thank you for that. That's gives us some things to work with here, because when I look at the makeup of most organizations today, they are a melting pot. When we look at the staffing, particularly, and I'm going to go out on a limb here, but particularly in mid-sized organizations where the labor pool is pretty diverse, and we're drawing in people from all kinds of walks of life that have different expectations, different ways of thinking, different ways of organizing, how they prefer to do things. And I've lived in, we were talking pre-show here, I've lived in 5 countries, and I've worked with all kinds of different cultures, some very similar to what I grew up with, and some unbelievably different. what I grew up with. And being able to navigate those has been a very interesting, lifelong journey for me, learning how to do that. So there is embedded in this a question. I'll get off my soapbox here. The title of this podcast is The Soul of Business. And my question here has to do with just the general nature of diversity, the general nature of navigating differences, working with differences. Where does the soul of business come into play from your perspective and from the work that you've done?
Yeah, I love the word soul because it really allows us to say, every soul is different. Every one of us is different. We bring different skills and talents. So soul of business would be we're each bringing our own unique skills and talents to the organization. From a cultural agility lens, I would think about the soul of business being how each of us were uniquely socialized. So we always talk about, country differences, and that's fun and that's okay to talk about. But the truth is every one of us has lots of socializing agents. So the country we were raised in, the family we were raised in, the religion we were raised in, the profession we ascribe to, the organization we work for, the teams you just kind of think about the different socializing agents that have embedded the values that we hold today. Now you think about each of these individuals, these souls kind of coming together, each with their own unique socializing agents. And we have, the beautiful diversity that is most organizations today. And we have the challenges that impact most organizations today.
Yeah. We're talking about differences. Yeah, I used to, I've done a lot of stuff, but program that I used to run, one of the things that we would do just as kind of an icebreaker sort of a thing is I'd have two people come up front and just sit across from each other, facing each other, and then ask the audience, what do you notice? And almost always they start sorting for differences rather than sorting for similarities. They go, well, he's got short hair, she's got long hair. As a matter of fact, there's a gender difference. And then they just go, I didn't ask what the difference is. I just said, what do you notice? We tend to, in my experience, sort for differences. And as a consequence, that opens up a Pandora's box of conflict oftentimes, because you're not like me. And that othering starts to come into play. Is that a valid observation, just, writ large?
Well, it's a fundamental aspect of neurobiology, right? Evolutionary biology. We tend to seek comfort, right? Especially in situations of novelty, like living in another country or starting a new job or doing anything that's new. We gravitate toward comfort, and comfort in our primitive brain is demographic similarity. So we're trained to see different as, even though this isn't true, it's not cognitively correct. But that whole, biological evolution hasn't caught up to the cognitive evolution. So our brains are sort of trying to hyper focus on difference as a protection mechanism long after it's needed. Of course, it's ridiculous, but it is where we go, especially under situations of pressure. So it's something to keep in mind whenever we talk about, building cultural agility. We recognize the fact that whenever we put someone into a new novel situation, again, whether it's another country, a new team, a new company, whatever, their bodies, if you will, are on high alert. So they kind of shorten, or they truncate their ability and their kind of connection to seek similarity or find common ground, which is it's one of the things we need to override.
This cultural agility, the way that you speak about it, it appears to me, and it sounds to me very legitimately, as if it's something that can be developed. Okay, so
Absolutely.
I may not be born with it because I've got a biological predisposition to seek comfort, which is organized, as you say, around similarities. How do in the work that you do with your clients,
Right.
how do you actually begin to develop cultural agility with either an individual leader and or their team, so that
Right.
their
Yeah.
effectiveness is actually impacted?
Yeah, so that it's interesting. So cultural agility is really a meta competency, and there's different kind of sub competencies under it. Things like our tolerance for ambiguity, our ability to kind of linger longer in situations that are new and novel without kind of rushing to conclusion. Our brains love to rush to conclusion. It's things like resilience, because when you're in a new context, you're going to make mistakes and you've got to bounce back. If not, you'll retreat to familiar again. Our curiosity, our ability to kind of ask more questions to learn the environment we're in. Our humility, the ability to say, you know what? I might be brilliant as a physicist or economist or whatever, but I don't know how to do that here. And there's a limit. Relationship building, because we're all social animals and we need to learn context through one another. These are all competencies that comprise this kind of bigger cultural agility. What do we know about each of those? So I'm an academic also, and my research is that, each of these, if you will, has a recipe. And the recipe is some portion of dispositional traits that are relatively fixed, and some portion, as you noted, things that you can do and change and build and grow and develop. So to answer your question directly, the first thing we do when we have clients is have everyone in the team or everyone in the organization understand where they sit on each of those 6 competencies. We use some self-assessments to get kind of build that self-awareness. And then we kind of help them own them. Like, so if you see that maybe curiosity is a natural strength, how can you leverage that whenever you go into a new situation? And we kind of work on strengths for a while. And then we do talk about each of the competencies where there's a developmental opportunity and how can you continually work on those and build those. So it's a lot of it's a lot of just straight up competency work.
Yeah.
And it's a nice way to talk about it because people are kind of are comfortable with the idea that everyone has a unique strength.
It's on the Skiilify website. I mean, literally, you've got right at the banner. Our mission is to equip everyone everywhere with the soft skills needed to succeed. And I read that. I went, yeah, good on you. Soft skills. They're not squishy. They're just soft skills because
Those soft skills are really hard.
they are really hard. Yeah, yeah. It's not like
fish in the water, right? The fish in the water doesn't know what it's like to swim in the water until they get on the shore, and now the fish really know what it's like to swim in water, and they want to get
what water was. Yeah.
We want to be able to feel comfortable in the context that we're in. And it's never going to be comfortable at the very beginning, but the ability to get there fast, to get there well, to get there effectively can really help a team build trust, communicate more effectively, collaborate. So all these things so critical for business. I get very concerned when I see all these studies that are coming out saying, adaptability is the skill of the moment, and the organizations that have found that one of their least effective competencies is global leadership competency. I get really worried because people assume that just putting people in different locations is enough for them to build cultural agility. And what we know, Blaine, is that it's not. I mean, you've lived in different countries. I'm sure you met expats all over the world who never interacted with the countries that they're in, and they never gained cultural experience. Yet the resume might suggest that they have cultural agility, and they don't. And I've met people who have never set foot out of their home country who have tremendous levels of cultural agility, and I would put them running a global team in a minute. So it's also, some of it's retraining organizations to stop looking at the kind of number of passport stamps and time abroad and start looking at the competencies needed in order to be effective.
See, I think that's a fascinating point to really illuminate. Yeah, I remember, when I was head of what was at the time the largest HR consulting firm in Asia, and we were based out of Japan. and we did a lot of consulting work for just about every multinational that was working in that area of the world at that point in time. I brought over a guy to serve as our sales manager, and I'd known him for a while. He was extraordinary in the U.S. as a sales manager, and he was, very much about producing results. It's kind of a type A, just go get it done, charge the hill. That did not go over real well in Japan. His ability to work with the team was very suspect, I would generously state it. And it caused us a considerable amount of difficulty. It wasn't that he didn't know what he was doing. As I'm listening to you here, what was missing was that cultural agility, the ability to actually adapt and adopt a sensibility to another cultural orientation.
Yeah, in order to be effective, sales in particular, because sales of all of, sales and customer service, government relations, there's a few professions where cultural adaptability is the most critical. We have kind of three categories of this. There's cultural adaptability, which is what we're describing, comporting yourself in the way that the other is expecting you to behave. There's also something called cultural minimization, which is you say, look, I understand that it's going to be different, but I need to persuade, motivate, and change us to do something that's a big counterculture. That often happens with, ethics or safety, production, time management, anything where there's sort of a standard, and leaders need to kind of motivate toward that standard. And then there's another thing called cultural integration, which is where you say, look, it's not going to be my way, it's not going to be Blaine's way, it's not going to be, four other people's way. We're a team, and we're going to create a culture unto ourselves. We're going to figure out how to work together and how to, what are our norms going to be? And we're going to reinforce those and socialize those within the team. What we found, Blaine, is that in the best global leaders, regardless, small company, large company, whatever, the best global leaders know when to pull which of those levers, can read the environment, and do so effectively. So I would suggest that your sales rep was fantastic, but probably didn't have the cultural agility to realize this was a situation that required adaptability, not a situation that required, I know how to do this. This is going to be my way.
Right. That was exactly, the case. And it took about 18 months to begin to chip away at that. It takes time. These three: adaptability, cultural minimization.
Minimization, and integration.
And the integration. The way that, again, pre-show, we were talking a little bit about some of the stuff I do, and it's organized around leadership. And as any good consultant does, I've got my own definition of leadership that we build everything around. Influencing others in order to co-create coordinated movement in pursuit of a worthy ideal. So, that's essentially what we're looking at.
Fantastic. Yeah.
The question of influencing, which takes command and control out of the equation. It's now it's a state of being rather than a state of doing. How does cultural agility, and I'm going to probably assume that I'm going to answer my own question here if I'm not careful, but how would cultural agility actually apply to somebody that is looking to enhance their ability to influence rather than command?
So, oh boy, there's a lot embedded in that question. So I mentioned the competency side of cultural agility, the things like humility and curiosity and tolerance. So certainly they would need those competencies in order to understand sort of how to most effectively influence, right? But there's another part of it, and that's understanding culture from the perspective of what could be different in this context. So in the case of your sales rep, who was from a very individualistic context, going into a very collectivistic one would have benefited from, right, knowing that, hey, that's not how things are done here. That's not how we influence here. That's not how we motivate here. That's not how we gain trust here.
Mhm.
So you don't gain trust by your credibility, you gain trust by your relationship. So it's this idea that, you work on individuals in order for them to be effective leaders, effective influencers, or by your definition, we want them to be able to understand the competencies and build on those competencies and have those competencies. But we also want them to understand that the context, the ways in which the context could be different, so that they're able to go in, read the environment, and respond as needed. I'm not sure if that answered your question, but I always want to make sure that I don't forget there's two parts to this equation, right?
Cool.
There's values differ from place to place, and also there's competencies needed to be effective in those different.
And I've got a hunch, and this is where I might answer my own question, but I've got a hunch that a large part of that competency set, the values are going to be what the values are, but the competency set has to do with the way that I navigate I'm going to be careful here. It's not navigating. It's about conversation. How do I hold a conversation that generates the kind of outcome that I'm looking to create with this cohort that I'm actually charged with leading or working with? It's
Right.
that conversation.
And how you do that, though, varies, right? So we talk a lot about it in the research. So, you've lived in both the Netherlands and Japan. If ever there were two more, kind of extreme examples of high context and low context speech. So in the Netherlands, the way you would navigate that, you could ask questions very directly and get very direct answers back, and navigate an understanding of the context that you're in with no kind of reading between the lines or subtle cue. You could just, your concern might be over kind of interpreting things. Whereas on the Japanese side, the environment might not naturally give you the best, clearest information to a direct communicator's ear, but you have to get much more effective at subtly picking up on and understanding and interpreting cues, and then kind of almost have those cultural guides in place who can help you with accuracy.
That's even present in the language. There's two words in Japan, hone and tatamai. Hone, there's belly talk, and then there's pro forma talk, if you will. You have to listen for the belly talk. Okay?
Yeah.
And listening for the belly talk, because it's what's being said is not being said. It's actually being inferred. And that's a fascinating way to actually think about it. We're going to take a real quick break here. When we come back, I want to continue to explore this notion of conversation, if you will, and I want to move us into conversationally. How do you deal with conflict? Because conflict is going to be a natural consequence of clashing cultures, would be my guess. So, folks, we're listening to Paula Caligiuri, this whole notion of cultural agility is fascinating to me. It really is truly fascinating, and we'll be right back, and we're going to look at some direct applications for those of you that are running into a buzzsaw. How do you deal with conflict? We'll be right back. The nature of life is evidenced in nature. Nature grows, and all of nature honors the desire to be more, to have more, and to do more. Life thrives when it's allowed to grow. And ideally, thriving is what we also, all of us, want to be able to do. Unfortunately, at some stage in life, most people find themselves settling into what I can only call a rut. And a rut is nothing more than a coffin with the ends kicked out. You want to quickly get out of any rut that you find yourself in. When you stop growing, that's when the coffin starts to appear. The simple truth is this, and this is true for everything in nature. You're going to die. I'm going to die. Every one of us dies. So the question we need to come to grips with is not, are we going to die? The question nature asks us to answer is, are we truly living? That's what motivation is about. It's the desire to move. It's the desire to grow and to excel. Have I lived? How have I lived? I'd love for you to take advantage of my Leadership Mindset Masterclass. It's all about providing you with the tools to ensure thriving for yourself and for those around you. Register today to receive the free introduction video and find out more about this acclaimed program. You'll also receive a copy of my international #1 bestseller, Compassionate Capitalism, A Journey to the Soul of Business. I'm Blaine Bartlett, and I look forward to helping you thrive. Welcome back, folks. Before we took a break, I kind of teased out where we were going to be heading next. And, Paula, when we enter into an environment where there are different cultures and sometimes very different culture in terms of, and I love the way that you had phrased this initially, people are uniquely socialized based on family of origin, cultures, education, all kinds of, so that unique socialization can oftentimes be a very fertile garden for conflict if we're not careful. So, what have you found, if there is a magic bullet, and I'm not suggesting that there is, but what might be some ways that we can begin to diffuse conflict in its most abrupt form, and use conflict in a creative and generative way?
It's interesting. Even the word conflict kind of gets so what's viewed as conflict in one culture that might look for group harmony is just conversation to someone from another culture. So even the perception of something as a conflict-based interaction might vary depending on how you're socialized. But we'll often do when a client calls and they say, okay, this team is having some conflict there, and it's usually they sort of say, we think it's cultural. Oftentimes what we'll start doing is we have them take it's a collaboration tool that we kind of are able to map out each member of the team anonymously on various values, like whether they're highly individualistic, like your sales associate, or more collectivistic. Very direct communicator, like you may have seen in the Netherlands, or indirect, like you may have seen in Japan. Whether they're very formal or very informal. So basically, we get in one snapshot a visual of the entire team. And usually what you see pretty quickly is the points where there's the greatest value oriented. In other words, when people walk into a conversation, what they're walking into, the values that they're bringing with them when they walk into a situation. And then we kind of just let them sort of interpret what do you see? Oh, well, some people are very direct, some are indirect, or some people are live to work and others are work to live, and that's causing friction because of where they place the emphasis of deadlines and the like, and that's causing conflict. So what we do is we actually just help people see the conflict as a function of the fact that we're just seeing the situation, not seeing the situation differently. Now, if it's a really genuine someone intellectual property or someone did something truly okay, that's a different challenge. But usually when they come to us, it's around something that it's more of a misperception, or somebody's feeling offended about a style or something, and you can't disregard it. That's a true feeling, but you can help people see that it's a function of how we were each uniquely socialized. So we kind of let them sort of dissect it a little bit, and then we sort of say, okay, well, let's talk about new group, like again, that integration. Let's talk about group norms. Let's talk about how we want to interact with each other. So we're all kind of on the same page, and this is going to fit some of you really well, and this is going to be kind of a little bit uncomfortable for others, but we're going to keep reinforcing this, and this is going to be our culture. And we do that with a lot of organizations, and that seems to work. That really seems to work.
Well, it seems like the distinctions between cultural adaptation, cultural minimization, and cultural integration, it kind of gives a contextual frame for people to hold this convergent disagreement, if you will, and make sense out of it. So, okay, well, maybe we don't have to completely adapt. Maybe we can just, like you said, integrate and create our own culture here. You use the word friction, and I'm fascinated with this because I've been playing with this notion. And I'd prefer friction over conflict for a very specific reason. Virginia Satir years ago wrote a book that I've taken a little phrase out of, and Virginia Satir was a family psychologist and did a lot of work in family systems. And communication was, for her, the foundation of everything. And she had a definition. Communication is simply, quote unquote, simply, the ways, plural, that we work out common meaning with one another. And it's the meaning generation, the meaning agreement that we actually strive for if we're looking to resolve, whatever, we may be dealing with. And the idea of friction, and I tried this out. Did you ever see the movie Bambi?
Oh, sure, years ago.
Well, remember when Bambi and Thumper are together and Bambi is asking Thumper to cross the ice. And and Bambi's legs are going all akimbo. They're going everywhere. Bambi can't get traction on the ice, and Thumper ends up pushing Bambi across the ice and into a snowdrift. But the point here has to do with there's no friction. Bambi can't cross the ice because there's no friction. So any kind of movement in an organization or in life requires friction. And the beauty of friction, if I actually can hold it well and work with it well, is friction by definition creates heat. And heat cleanses, typically, and it also generates light. So it can actually illuminate meaning. So I'm mentioning this because a lot of people in my experience tend to be conflict averse. Mm-hmm. And if they can learn how to effectively embrace appropriately conflict, from the orientation of its friction, how can I use this to move us closer to where we say we'd like to go? Now I've got something I can work with. People have got different ways of working with friction, I've got a hunch, from a cultural perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Certainly, like you said, some people are very conflict avoidant. They will kind of use everything but the, having to say no. They'll disregard it. They'll ignore it. They'll use high context speech or say things like, oh, that's interesting, when they're really thinking that's the dumbest idea I've ever seen. Or those that will directly say that's the dumbest idea I've ever seen and then cause all kind of offense, right? They kind of are all versions of that creation of friction, but in reality, there's something in their differences of opinion that need to surface in order for the organization to move, or that unit or that group or that moment to move forward. What's useful, kind of, I don't know if it induces friction as much as it induces the context in which friction could occur. We actually have, like in these strategy meetings, we'll have organizational leaders kind of identify what are the non-negotiables in your organization.
Yes.
What are the situations that around the world cannot deviate? That behaviorally they have to be identical. That's a kind of cultural minimization idea. Okay, where might that be the greatest challenge? And one group will say, oh, that's not going to work here, that's not going to work there. Okay, we're going to need to make that work. So this is like that induction of friction, right? So how do we do that? And then you kind of drop to adaptation. Okay, not everything needs to be identical around the world. What are we going to allow that's free to vary? And there too, there's going to be friction. Some people are, no, that should be universal. No, that can be. And that kind of also. What are we going to take the time, pause, sort of create collectively? Oh, that takes too much time, or, So at every one of these, we can kind of preempt, create a little bit of friction to create a bigger problem later.
Yeah.
And sometimes that helps because we just give it a little bit of language and let the group sort of identify themselves.
That's a beautiful answer. I love that. Thank you. Folks, we've been talking to Paula Caligiuri, and I could continue this conversation for quite a while here. I really could. This is fascinating to me. You have got a couple of assessments on the company website. I'm assuming it's on the company website. I didn't check that out, but
it is, yes.
People find out more about, number one, what you're up to, what Skiilify, the company, is up to, and where can they access these free assessments?
Sure. So the one that we've been talking about the most is the cultural agility. We're a public benefit corporation. Our angel investor, Andy Plummer, was wonderful. And he said, Paula, this is way too important to sort of bury. We need to make sure everybody has access to building cultural agility. So we have a tool that's free for anyone to use. It's called My Guide. It's MYGIIDE. It's spelled in a funny way, but you can remember we're helping people see eye to eye. But on there, you can do a self-assessment. Your listeners can do a self-assessment of their cultural competencies. They can get some development advice. They can also assess their cultural values and compare themselves to prototypes of different countries. So it's a really nice, it's a free resource. You don't need to contact me. You can just go on to myguide.com and use it at any time.
Okay, that's MYGIIDE.com.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And then also through Skiilify, you can certainly find me. I'm pretty easy to find if you can spell my last name.
Yeah, and all of this will be in the show notes. And the company name has also got an interesting spelling, SKIILIFY. Eye to eye.
Yes, I.
I love that. I was going to ask about that, and I forgot to ask about why is it called that? Yeah. So, Paula, thank you so much for being such a gracious and informative guest. I've loved this conversation.
Oh, this was fun, Blaine. Thank you.
My pleasure, absolutely. And folks, again, my admonition, as always, in your life, find a way to be a center of distribution, not a center of accumulation. And nothing in nature works as a center of accumulation, not in any way, shape, or form. You got to give stuff away. Give a hug away. Give a smile away. Give a twinkle in the eye away. Give something away today, and you're going to find that your life works a whole lot better. And I'll see you on the next episode. Take care.